The Glacier Protocol was the most insane piece of operational logistics I had ever overseen, and given my decades spent trading pleasantries and poison in the shadow government of the People's Republic, that was a high bar. The target was critical: the Cinnabar device, a quantum synchronization key capable of decrypting the next generation of kinetic defense satellites. It wasn't just highly classified, it was irreplaceable. It was housed in the Iron Gate Vault, 3 levels beneath the Beijing Second Data Center, a facility that smelled perpetually of ozone and impending doom. My cover, Li Mei, the meticulous financial consultant specializing in high-frequency trading arbitrage, was already stretched thinner than gold leaf on water. The stress fracture in the operation was Dr. Li Chen, the lead cryptographer, and her biometric profile. The MSS, post the Xi'an microdrive incident, had upgraded security far beyond standard optical scans. They implemented the 5-digit fingerprint scan, requiring all 5 fingers to be placed simultaneously on the pad, with specific, individualized pressure points and an infinitesimal magnetic field reading to ensure dermal authenticity. This was not a glove job, this was dermis replacement. We had bioharvested Li Hua's discarded skin cells from her remote safe house in Yunnan, a process that took 4 agonizing months. CIAR&D produced the custom-engineered latex glove, layered with the authentic dermis structure. The complication? The dermis had to remain exactly 32.5 degrees Celsius, Li Hua's precise resting surface temperature, to pass the thermal signature check. Hence, the Glacier Protocol, a microcooling agent running through the wristband, managed by a complex algorithm compensating for the center's notorious internal climate fluctuations. Every breath, every movement, risked failing the thermal barrier. I spent 72 hours fasting, meditating to drop my core temperature half a degree, just to manage the residual heat bloom. The Skynet surveillance grid felt less like cameras and more like thousands of digital eyes burning holes into the back of my neck. They were not watching for movement. They were listening for silence, searching for any disturbance in the city's electromagnetic rhythm. That night, gliding my unmarked sedan through the sanitized, quiet streets of Haidian, I knew I was already caught in the web, simply waiting for the spider to confirm my presence. Accessing the secure compound required the classic utility interruption deception, but executed with frightening precision. I used my Li Mei identity to schedule an emergency audit of the center's financial servers, gaining Level 2 access to the maintenance subfloors 24 hours prior. Once inside, the biological preparations began. The cryogenic dermal gloves were applied in the utility closet designated for ventilation filters, the air thick with mineral dust and despair. It took 18 agonizing minutes, the microfilament wires linking the temperature regulator to my pulse watch. Any sudden spike in adrenaline would translate directly into a heat signature spike, ruining the carefully managed 32.5 degrees Celsius integrity. The gloves themselves felt alien, cold, clammy, and unnervingly sensitive. I could feel the microscopic patterns of Li Hua's identity imposed upon my own. I wasn't April Woods anymore. I was wearing Li Chen's outer skin. The real test came during the descent to the sublevel 3. The elevators were decommissioned during the supposed financial audit, forcing me to use the service stairs, a spiral of unmonitored concrete that amplified every sound. As I neared the vault level, the air shifted, heavier, colder. It was the specific microclimate created by the vault's massive dehumidifiers. I activated the signal jammer, a tiny pulse generator disguised as a cigarette lighter, which created a localized distortion field around the nearest acoustic monitor. I slipped into the main utility conduit, a crawl space barely wide enough for a shoulder, and began the 90-foot slide toward the iron gate. The metallic scraping of my belt buckle against the ductwork sounded like a freight train in the oppressive silence. I focused solely on the temperature readout on my wrist. 32.4 degrees Celsius. Perfect. But then, through the thin aluminum wall separating the conduit from the vault vestibule, I heard voices. Deep, authoritative, and utterly terrifying. They were not guards making rounds. They were holding a meeting. The voices resolved into a terrifying chorus. The principal speaker was Director Gao, the head of the Ministry of State Security, MSS, often referred to internally as the architect. His presence was completely unscheduled. He was using the vault vestibule, 10 feet from my location inside the ventilation conduit, as a temporary, secure command post for a late-night operational briefing. My heart hammered against my ribs, instantly threatening to breach the Glacier Protocol's thermal limits. I forced myself to flatten completely, breathing shallowly through a specialized nasal filter designed to remove my unique chemical signature from the air. Gao's voice, a dry, academic baritone, was discussing the absolute imperative of operational integrity, followed by a detailed breakdown of potential Western intrusion methodologies. He was quite literally planning countermeasures against me. We expect a kinetic diversion, Gao clipped, his voice echoing slightly off the polished granite floor. But the real threat remains biometric compromise. The 5-digit scan is foolproof, tied to Li Hua Chen's neurological index as well as the dermal map. Any pressure deviation of 0.05 newtons will initiate a level 4 lockdown. I could hear the rustle of papers, the faint clinking of porcelain. Gao was having tea. I calculated the distance. 10 feet. If I moved 1 inch, the acoustic sensors would register the vibration transmitted through the concrete slab. My extraction window was tied to a power surge plan by my team, the flicker, 4 blocks away, designed to draw security attention. The window was 45 seconds. Gao showed no signs of concluding his briefing. I was entombed, listening to the man who wanted to dismantle my life discuss the mechanisms designed to capture me. The air became heavy with the scent of his expensive, rare oolong tea, a sensory detail so sharp and banal it felt like a deliberate taunt in the face of my impending catastrophe. Paranoia was no longer a state of mind. It was physics. The 45-second window was fixed, unmovable. At T-120 seconds, the tactical radio hidden in my molar provided the countdown tick, silent save for the vibration I felt deep within my skull. Gao was deep into a tangent about the necessity of eliminating all systemic redundancies when a junior officer coughed nervously. This small disruption gave me a fraction of a second to register a truly terrifying operational update Gao had just casually mentioned. The new seismic heart rate monitors, SHRM, installed this afternoon. Calibrated for resting baseline. Anything above 70 BPM within 15 meters of the vault will trigger an immediate silent alarm to central security. My resting heart rate, even under chemical suppression, was usually 55 BPM. The sheer adrenaline of being 10 feet from Gao was currently pushing me towards 65. If I executed the necessary physical maneuver to exit the conduit and reach the scanner, a quick, sharp rotation, my heart rate would surge past the critical threshold. I had to go lower, quickly. I injected a preloaded dose of modified beta blocker directly into my femoral artery through a microport hidden beneath my tactical trousers. The effect was immediate, suffocating. My vision tunneled slightly. The sounds of Gao's voice became muffled. My pulse dropped to a dangerously low 38 BPM. This gave me maybe 60 seconds of high-intensity operational viability before I risked systemic collapse. The flicker was incoming. T-5 seconds. I felt the pressure change in the air just before the light, the intentional, almost imperceptible surge that would draw eyes away from the interior screens. Now. I executed the rotation, sliding out of the conduit exit panel designed to resemble a non-functional drainage pipe. I was upright, immediately adopting the practiced, slumped posture of a late-shift sanitation worker. I held a mop and bucket, the perfect visual camouflage in an institutional setting. My heart hammered, but externally, thanks to the drug cocktail, my physiological readout was likely flatlining. I hoped the SHRM system couldn't distinguish between a calm operative and one actively dying. The walk across the vestibule was the shortest, longest journey of my life. 10 feet. Gao was positioned facing away from the vault, reviewing documents spread across a portable stand-up briefing table, his back a monolithic challenge. I moved with agonizing slowness, my internal system screaming against the drug-induced stupor. Every step on the polished concrete floor felt calculated to create a monumental resonance wave. I could smell the metallic tang of the cleaning solution in my bucket, mixing with the heady, expensive musk of Gao's cologne, and the warm scent of the oolong. Sensory overload threatened to fracture my focus. As I passed within arm's reach of the briefing table, Gao's junior aide looked up, his eyes glassy from exhaustion. I nodded once, the generic, subservient gesture of a service worker. He registered the mop and looked back down. Survival depended on being utterly unremarkable. Then, the inevitable disaster. A tiny, almost invisible metallic strip lifted slightly from the floor near the vault entrance, a maintenance cover plate. My heavy, rubber-soled boot caught the edge. Not enough to send me sprawling, but enough to introduce a critical wobble to my balance. I had to stabilize. I reached out, my dermis-gloved hand contacting the smooth, cold surface of the iron gate vault itself, millimeters from the sonic intrusion detectors embedded in the steel. The contact was brief, precise, but it was contact. I held my breath, waiting for the klaxons that never sounded. The thermal sensor embedded near the door handle registered the 32.5 degrees Celsius touch, Li Huachen's touch. I had inadvertently used the brief stumble to perform an initial, momentary biometric tease, establishing my thermal baseline for the system. I pushed forward, placing the mop bucket down with exaggerated care, directly in front of the 5-digit scan panel. It was time to introduce Li Hua to the machine. The 5-digit scan panel was a flawless sheet of crystalline sapphire glass, completely black until activated. I pulled the small UV torch disguised as a pen from my pocket and ran it across the surface. Tiny, almost invisible etchings appeared. The 5 specific locations where Li Huachen's fingers, and only Li Huachen's fingers, had to rest. The specificity was maddening. It required an absolute 0-degree deviation in angle and pressure. The cryogenic gloves suddenly felt like lead weights, the bio-harvested dermis painfully rigid. The pressure difference was the key failure point. If I pressed too hard, I invalidated the scan. Too light, and the system wouldn't register the full biometric map. I raised my hand, the dermal glove glowing slightly under the emergency UV light. I had practiced this sequence 3,000 times in the vault simulator. Practice meant nothing when Director Gao was sipping tea 10 feet away. I placed the index finger first, then the middle, using the etched guidelines. I held my breath, then applied the final 3 digits simultaneously, the pinky, the ring, the thumb, each touching its specified pressure zone. The entire process took 1.7 seconds, but time seemed to freeze, suspended in the hum of the cooling agents in the walls. For one terrifying moment, the screen remained black. Then, a soft blue light pulsed behind the glass. The magnetic field confirmed the dermal signature. A synthesized, neutral female voice echoed softly in the vestibule, a sound that cut through the silence like a scalpel. Biometric confirmation. Li Huachen. Access granted. Time stamp. 2:47 hours. The lock mechanism hissed, a loud pneumatic sigh of success, and the massive iron gate, 6 inches thick, began to slide inward. Gao did not flinch, but I saw the junior aide subtly shift his weight. The noise had been too close, too loud. I had to be quick. The vault interior was clinical, bathed in the sharp, sterile glare of LED lighting. The air was dry and smelled of expensive plastics and liquid nitrogen. The Cinnabar device sat exactly where the satellite imagery suggested it would, mounted in a vibration-dampened cradle on a pedestal in the center of the chamber. I moved immediately, my suppressed heart rate making my movements feel unnaturally sluggish. I reached the pedestal, confirming the shielding mechanisms. I deactivated the primary magnetic lock. This required a sequence of 5 precise, downward pushes on a hidden keypad. 1-4-7-8-9, success. As I reached for the Cinnabar key, a sleek, black cylinder slightly larger than my thumb, I saw it. Embedded directly beneath the cradle, flashing once every minute, was a small, high-resolution optical lens. It wasn't just a camera. It was a secondary lock, specifically a retina scanner tied to a recent facial recognition update that my team had failed to anticipate. They had updated the biometric requirement 5 days prior. I had Li Huachen's dermis, but I did not have Li Huachen's eye. The retinal map, tied to the original 5-digit sequence, would scan instantly upon retrieval of the device. If the scan failed, a signal would be sent directly to the MSS director's personal terminal, bypassing the center's local security loop entirely. My 45-second window had evaporated. I now had maybe 10 seconds before Gao, noticing the light change, decided to investigate the open vault door. Panic threatened to override the beta blockers. I needed Lihua Chen's eye, and I needed it 5 seconds ago. I retreated slightly, leaning against the cold wall. Time was the enemy, and technology was my only friend. I reached into the lining of the dermal glove and pulled out the absolute last resort, the Retina Mirage contacts. These were ultra-thin lenses containing microscopic holographic emitters pre-programmed with Lihua Chen's retinal topography, based on archival photos and medical data. The challenge was placement and activation. I fumbled the first lens in my drug-numbed fingers, dropping it onto the sterile floor. The second one I managed to position over my iris. I blinked twice to activate the emitter. It was like looking through shimmering water. The world bent slightly, but the projection was active. I approached the cinnabar cradle again, heart rate now spiking slightly despite the drugs. I held the decoy device, a flawless replica created by CIA Black Shop, ready in my left hand. I made the switch. As the cinnabar device lifted out, the hidden retina scanner immediately activated, casting a faint red light across my eye. The holographic emitters kicked into overdrive, projecting Lihua Chen's unique blood vessel pattern onto the sensor. The system hesitated for half a second, an eternity, before granting access confirmation. I quickly placed the decoy key into the cradle, simulating the action of a technician retrieving and replacing the device. But the Retina Mirage required a massive power draw. As I sealed the cradle, I noticed it, a micro flicker in the overhead LED, too small for the human eye to consciously register, but large enough for the centralized monitoring system, designed to detect power anomalies, to flag. I secured the real cinnabar key in a shielded pocket. I had the intelligence, but I had left a breadcrumb the size of a meteorite. I resealed the iron gate vault manually, the pneumatic hiss sounding infinitely louder this time. I grabbed the mop bucket and turned. Director Gao was still seated, but his junior aide was now standing next to him, staring intently at a small, secure tablet that had just chirped. The aide whispered something to Gao, pointing to the screen. I knew instantly what he was seeing. The 0.003 second power fluctuation on the sublevel 3 lighting grid. Gao's head snapped up. His eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto the vault door, then quickly slid to my location, the seemingly innocuous sanitation worker. I saw the recognition, not of my face, but of the anomaly I represented. Lockdown, Gao bellowed, his voice transforming from academic calm to battlefield command. Initiate level 5. Seal all primary conduits. I did not run. Running was definitive guilt. I maintained the slow, shuffling walk toward the utility space, my hand reaching behind me to activate the conduit door release. As I slipped back into the cramped darkness, the heavy, hydraulic slam of the facility's reinforced exterior blast doors sealing all entrances echoed through the tunnels. The pursuit was immediate. I heard the unmistakable thud of boots hitting the floor just outside the conduit exit. They were fast, mobilized within seconds. I was trapped in the subterranean maintenance system, but now they knew exactly where I was, and they were sealing every viable egress point. My mission had shifted from intelligence gathering to pure survival. The Glacier Protocol was now completely irrelevant. I was burning hot with adrenaline, racing against time, and the suffocating realization that I had just signed Li Mei's death warrant. The maintenance conduit was designed for utility cables, not escape. I was forced to abandon the mop and bucket, excess weight, and crawl deeper into the humid, chemical-smelling darkness. Gao's team was cutting access panels open above me, their voices muffled but clear. South Conduit, we have thermal readings. Move. My path led directly toward the massive main trunk line for Beijing's subterranean drainage, a controlled flood zone during monsoon season. It was the only way out, but it required traversing 200 meters of pressurized pipe barely 40 centimeters in diameter. I reached the junction box, twisting the emergency valve marked high pressure overflow, releasing a torrent of filthy, cold runoff into the pipe ahead. This would flush the system, providing temporary cover and making the MSS pursuit impossible in the narrow pipe. I plunged into the freezing water, the cinnabar key shielded securely within my tactical harness. The rush of the drainage system carried me through the pipe, a high-speed, claustrophobic journey that battered my body against the rough concrete walls. My final rendezvous point was a specific manhole cover near the Forbidden City, masked perfectly by a vendor selling steaming baozi at 6 a.m. I burst out of the manhole just as the first glimmer of dawn broke, shaking off the sewage water and immediately assuming the posture of an agitated, early morning pedestrian. The handoff was swift, a brush pass with a diplomatic attaché carrying a black briefcase. The cinnabar device was gone, safe. I melted into the crowd, walking toward the rising sun. Did Gao see my shadow? Did he feel the momentary lapse in the city's electronic heartbeat? The tension was palpable. The escape was successful, but the cost was absolute. Li Mei, the meticulous financial consultant, ceased to exist at 2:55 a.m. I was now a ghost in a city saturated with surveillance, an operative who had successfully swapped a quantum encryption key 10 feet from the most powerful intelligence director in China, leaving behind only the faintest scent of oolong and the chill of exposed dermis.